Brooke Logan had always been a fighter through decades of heartbreaks, betrayals, marriages, divorces, reconciliations, rivalries, and relentless media scrutiny. She had always found a way to rise. But nothing in her life, and not the war with Taylor, not the countless scandals with Ridge, not even the family feuds at Forrester Creations could have prepared her for this. It started with headaches. Subtle at first. A little dizziness in the morning. Forgetting small things here and there. Everyone chalked it up to stress. Brooke had been juggling the fallout of Hope and Luna's situation, the breakdown between Will and Bill, and the growing tension across the Logan Spencer-Forrester triangle. She'd barely had time to breathe. But when Ridge found her unconscious in their living room, collapsed with a glass of water shattered at her side, he knew it was something more. And what the doctors said next changed everything. Ridge was the one who rode in the ambulance. He was the one pacing the hallway when they wheeled her into tests, scans, more tests, more waiting. Hours passed like years. His mind ran through every possibility: stroke, dehydration, exhaustion, but none of it prepared him for the words the doctor finally spoke. Brooke had a brain tumor. Not a stress-related episode. Not a panic attack. A tumor. Real. Growing. Possibly malignant. Possibly inoperable. The world stopped. Ridge felt like the air had been ripped from his lungs. This wasn't just the woman he had loved for most of his life. This was Brooke. His Brooke. The one he'd built empires and torn down marriages for. The woman who had defined his past, complicated his present, and always lived in his future. And now the doctors were talking in cold, clinical terms about mass sizes, neurological symptoms, surgical risks, and timelines. He couldn't hear them. He could only see her lying in that sterile bed, pale, still, tubes running from her arms, unaware that her life had just changed forever. When she finally woke up, she smiled like she always did, half defiant, half amused. "What happened?" she asked softly. Ridge sat beside her and took her hand. He didn't know how to say it. He didn't want to. But he had to. Because if Brooke Logan was going to go to war with her own body, she deserved to know what she was up against. He whispered the truth, his voice barely holding. She didn't flinch. Her face didn't twist in fear. She blinked slowly, then asked, "Is it operable?" Ridge couldn't answer. Not yet. They didn't know. More scans. More specialists. More time. But Brooke didn't wait for a plan. She sat up straighter. She asked for a mirror. She brushed her hair. She told Ridge to call Hope. Then RJ. Then Donna. She wanted everyone to know. She didn't want secrets. Not now. Not when every moment might suddenly matter more than the next. Word traveled fast. Within hours, Hope was at the hospital, clutching her mother like she was trying to rewind time. RJ followed, silent but broken. Donna cried. Katie held Brooke's other hand and whispered that it wasn't fair. Ridge stood back, watching the Logan sisters encircle their own in fierce, terrified love. He realized then how much Brooke meant, not just to him, but to all of them. She was the glue, the spark, the backbone. And now she was the patient. Outside the hospital room, conversations began. Whispers of treatment options, names of specialists, which hospitals in Europe or New York had handled similar cases. Eric offered his jet. Steffi offered her contacts in Switzerland. Taylor Rupin, hearing the news, immediately dropped her professional distance and contacted neurologists she trusted. This wasn't about rivalry anymore. Not when Brooke's life was on the line. But in the center of all of it stood Ridge. He hadn't left the hospital. Not once. He refused to. He slept on the couch. He reviewed her charts. He demanded updates every hour. Brooke noticed, of course. She always noticed. Even through painkillers and fatigue, she watched Ridge like she always had, running the man beneath the armor. And when they were alone, she asked him, "Are you staying because you're afraid I'm dying, or because you still love me?" Ridge didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because both were true. The next days were a blur of procedures and consults. They identified the location of the tumor frontal lobe, close to key vascular structures. Surgery was risky. Removal could save her. But the chance of complications spares, memory loss, speech impairment was high. Brooke didn't hesitate. "Schedule it," she said. "I'm not going to sit around and wait to fade away," Rich argued. So did her kids. But Brooke had made up her mind. As the surgery date approached, tensions flared in the family. Hope wanted alternative therapies. Katie was furious that Rich wasn't fighting harder to stop the surgery. RJ was shell-shocked, barely able to speak. Even Bill Spencer made an appearance stoic, uninvited, and uncharacteristically human. "I know we've been through a lot," he told Brooke quietly, "but I'm not ready to say goodbye." The morning of the operation was cold, silent. The hospital lights buzzed. Brooke was wheeled into pre-op, surrounded by her entire family. She looked at each of them and said, "I love you. Don't fight each other. If I come back, I want peace." Then she reached for Ridge's hand. "Don't leave me." He shook his head. "Never." The wait was brutal. Hours crawled. Updates were vague. Words like stable and ongoing were all anyone could get. Ridge paced until his legs went numb. Hope cried into her mother's scarf. Katie prayed. Eric showed up and sat silently beside Donna. No one left. No one could. When the surgeon finally emerged, the hallway froze. "We removed the tumor," he said. "She made it through. But the next 48 hours will tell us everything." Back in ICU, Rich sat at her bedside. Machines beeped. Tubes pulsed. Brooke was alive but unconscious. He leaned in and whispered every promise he'd ever broken, every word he should have said, every feeling he had buried. Then he kissed her forehead and said, "Come back, please." And somewhere under all that silence and stillness, Brooke Logan fought. Again. Because that's what she's always done. Brooke Logan had faced many crossroads in her life affairs, marriages, rivalries, corporate battles, but nothing had prepared her for this. Nothing could prepare her for the moment when a doctor looked her in the eye and told her the tumor growing in her brain was benign, yes, but dangerously close to the region that controlled speech. The words landed hard. Not cancer, not terminal, but still terrifying. Surgery could save her life, but it might also take her voice. And for Brooke Logan, whose voice had captivated boardrooms, lovers, enemies, and an entire generation of Forrester drama, the idea of losing it was unthinkable. It was not just her words. It was her identity, her legacy. Ridge Forrester, sitting at her side, had barely exhaled from the shock of the original diagnosis when this new horror emerged. One moment he was praying she'd survive. The next he was handed a choice no man ever wants. Sign the surgical release immediately and risk robbing Brooke of her ability to speak, or gamble precious time for a more complete evaluation. But risk the tumor growing into something irreversible. Ridge, always decisive in business, always volatile in love, now stood paralyzed in medical limbo. The surgeons were pressuring for urgency. The neurologists wanted caution, and caught in the middle was the woman he loved more than any other. Just as the tension thickened and Ridge began to fray, a new voice entered the room. Bridget, Brooke's daughter, a doctor, a healer, a Logan, and now her mother's attending physician. She returned to Los Angeles not for fashion galas or family celebrations, but because she was summoned by a call that no daughter ever wants to receive. "Your mother has a brain tumor. We need you." Bridget stepped into the hospital with professional calm, but emotional chaos simmering beneath her lab coat. She reviewed Brooke's charts, examined the imaging, read every test result line by line, and immediately questioned the rush to surgery. Her experience in neurological cases had taught her one thing: surgery near the speech center should be a last resort, not a first step. She voiced her concern. Loudly, firmly, to everyone. And that's when Taylor Hayes stepped in. Taylor had already inserted herself into Brooke's care unofficially, offering consultation after years of psychiatric experience and countless medical missions abroad. But she and Bridget clashed instantly. Taylor leaned into the psychological toll, Brooke's anxiety, the need to act quickly to spare long-term trauma. Bridget pushed back hard, arguing that clinical data, not emotional fears, will drive decisions. What began as professional debate escalated into a personal standoff. For years they had battled for Ridge's heart. Now they were battling over Brooke's brain. Hope Logan, already emotionally shattered by her mother's collapse, became the emotional anchor in the chaos. She stood by her mother's bedside daily, watched her sleep, held her hand, and begged for one thing: time. "Don't rush into this," she whispered over and over. "Please, Mom. Let's try something else first. Let's look at target therapy. Let's talk to the specialists in Geneva, Boston, anywhere. We have options. Don't go into that OR until we've tried everything." Brooke, always the decision maker in her own story, suddenly found herself powerless. The pain was manageable. The tumor wasn't growing rapidly, but every hour brought more pressure. Ridge's eyes begged her to trust the doctors. Bridget demanded a conservative protocol. Taylor challenged every delay. Hope sobbed at her side. And in the middle of it all, the hospital became a war zone of emotions, egos, and unresolved history. And outside those hospital walls, in the world where rumors moved faster than medical charts, Sheila Carter was watching, listening, planning. Sheila, never one to miss an opportunity to spread chaos, seized the news of Brooke's condition and twisted it into a weapon. Quietly, she whispered in the ears of anyone willing to listen, especially those with ties to Forrester Creations. She stoked fear. She seeded uncertainty. She suggested that the Forresters were hiding the truth about Brooke's condition to avoid public fallout. She hinted that the Logans were using Brooke's illness to curry sympathy and seize control of Forrester again. She reignited old resentments, played old enemies against each other, and slowly methodically to fracture the fragile truce between the Logan and Forrester factions. She whispered to Steffi that Brooke's legacy shouldn't overshadow her leadership at Forrester. She murmured to Thomas that the Logans had always manipulated public narrative for power. She told Donna's assistant that Bridget and Taylor's feud was tearing apart Brooke's care plan. Within days, tensions at Forrester escalated. Meetings grew colder. Collaboration soured. Every move by a Logan was now second-guessed by a Forrester. And Sheila smiled. Back at the hospital, Rich remained trapped in his impossible position. Every time he tried to convince Brooke to approve the surgery, she reached for Hope's hand instead. Every time he tried to side with Bridget, Taylor confronted him in private and reminded him that indecision might cost them everything. He loved Brooke. He feared losing her. But he also feared making the wrong choice and condemning her to a life where she could never say his name again. The deadline loomed. Doctors needed an answer, a decision. And Ridge, holding the surgical consent form, realized he had never been more unsure in his life. In a rare moment of quiet, Brooke finally stirred. Her voice was faint, but firm. She called for her daughters, for Ridge, for Taylor. And when they gathered around her, she looked them all in the eyes and said, "This is my life, my voice, my decision." She asked for both treatment plans in writing. She asked for direct input from the neurologist, the radiologist, and her new specialist in Geneva, who Hope had contacted in desperation. She told Bridget and Taylor to stop fighting. She thanked Ridge for his love. And then she said the words no one expected. "I'm not going into surgery." "Not yet," gasps filled the room. Taylor objected. Bridget nodded. Ridge was stunned. Hope cried again, this time with relief. Brooke continued. "I'm going to try the targeted therapy. If it fails, then we reassess. But I won't go under a knife without knowing we tried everything first." Her voice was calm, but final. And in that moment, the entire room shifted. Brooke wasn't a patient anymore. She was a woman taking back her story. As she began her experimental therapy, the hospital became a fortress of hope and uncertainty. daily injections, hours of observation, an entire team monitoring her response. Progress was slow. Some days were better, others worse. But Brooke never wavered. She documented everything. Her thoughts, her fears, her memories. She asked Hope to record her voice just in case. She told RJ to keep running the Forrester digital line without interruption. She told Donna and Katie to stay strong for the family. And she told Ridge one more thing. If I lose my voice, you'll still hear me. In every decision, every heartbeat, Sheila continued to stir unrest. The Forrester board grew divided. Questions were raised about Brooke's long-term role. Some feared she wouldn't return. Others feared she wouldn't come back more powerful, more beloved than ever. Internal politics flared. Brooke's absence became both a void and a threat. And the war for control of Forrester Creations reignited under the surface. But in the center of it all, Brooke fought. Quietly, fiercely, day by day, treatment by treatment, with her family, her fire, and her faith. Because if this was the greatest battle of her life, she would win it on her terms, with her voice or without it. Brooke Logan had always been the center of Storm's emotional, romantic, professional. But this was different. This storm was silent, invisible, creeping through her mind without warning or mercy. The benign brain tumor nestled dangerously close to her speech and memory centers was no longer just a medical condition. It was dismantling her life piece by piece, moment by moment. While the doctors debated surgical risk and Ridge paced the hallways racked with indecision, Brooke began forgetting things. Not entire days, not entire names, just pieces. Important pieces. The kind that once defined her entire love story with Ridge. It began with minor things, forgetting which day they first kissed again after their latest reunion, calling RJ by Hope's name, searching for a necklace she'd already given to Donna weeks ago. But soon it got worse. She forgot that Ridge had stayed overnight in her hospital room. She forgot what they talked about the night she made him promise not to let her disappear. She forgot a soft moment in the garden where he kissed her and whispered that she was his always. Ridge tried not to let it break him, but it did. Every time he reminded her, she looked at him with the kind of polite confusion that didn't belong between two people who had survived decades of passion and pain. She would smile, nod, but her ice toes famous Logan ice wouldn't light up with recognition. And that's when Ridge realized she wasn't just losing memories. She was slowly losing them. Brooke knew it too. And she didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Not fully. Instead, she found a way to fight back, in the only way she could. Alone at night, when the hospital halls were quiet and the world had retreated, she began recording voice memos. Not medical updates, not business notes, not drama, just her truth. She called them voice journals, and each one was meant for someone she loved. Hope, RJ, Ridge, Donna, even Katie. She poured everything into those messages, her thoughts, her fears, her memories in case they vanished for good. She didn't want them to wonder what she was thinking if the surgery failed. She wanted them to know. For Hope, she talked about strength, motherhood, the weight of doing the right thing even when it hurt. For RJ, she spoke about creativity, legacy, the Forrester fire inside him she never wanted him to suppress. For Donna, she whispered about sisterhood, and for Katie, she acknowledged all the mistakes and silences they never healed. And for Ridge, confessed everything. She spoke without filters, without fear. I know you still love me, she said into the recorder. I never stopped loving you, even when I should have. Even when I hated myself for it. I never stopped. She labeled it for Ridge only if, and she saved it to a private folder, one only Hope and RJ knew about. She told them quietly, between treatments, don't listen unless the worst happens. If I don't come back, if I come back and I'm not me anymore, then play them. Let them hear me. Let them know me. She never expected anyone else to hear them. Especially not Deacon. But Deacon did. He stumbled onto the file one afternoon while dropping off a care package. Brooke had asked him to retrieve something from her tablet, and the audio file was still open. One tap. 1 second. That was all it took. He heard her voice. He heard her confession to Ridge, and the sound of it sliced through him like a blade. Deacon hadn't admitted it out loud, not to anyone, but his feelings for Brooke had never truly faded. He had stepped aside countless times. For Ridge. For hope. For Brooke's stability. But now, watching her so fragile, so mortal, he had allowed himself to hope again. Hope that maybe this time would be different. That maybe fate had left one door open. And now, in an instant, that hope was gone. Because her heart still belonged to Ridge. He tried to pretend he hadn't heard it, but he couldn't. And soon enough, Ridge knew something was off. The tension between them snapped one afternoon in Brooke's hospital room. Ridge caught Deacon staring too long. Deacon accused Ridge of letting Brooke suffer because he couldn't make a decision. Ridge countered by demanding to know what Deacon had really come to the hospital for. Words flew. Tempers flared. And finally, Deacon snapped. You think she's yours. You think she come back to you. You haven't heard what she says when she thinks no one's listening. Ridge's eyes narrowed. What did you hear? And then Deacon said, I've heard Brooke say she still loved him. That it was always Ridge. That even on the edge of life and death, she hadn't let go. The fight that followed was loud, messy, emotional, and overheard by too many people. Donna tried to break it up. Hope was furious that Deacon had invaded Brooke's privacy. RJ demanded they both leave his mother alone. But the damage had been done. The old rivalry between Ridge and Deacon was back, and this time fueled by guilt, jealousy, and looming loss. Then came surgery day. After weeks of debate, risk assessments, and exhausting alternatives, the medical team confirmed the tumor had started to press dangerously close to critical blood vessels. The risk of waiting outweighed the risk of operating. The family gathered. Goodbyes were spoken at dramatic ones, but real ones. Soft, scared ones. Brooke smiled, kissed Hope's hand, told Ridge she trusted him, told RJ to be brave. And then she went under. The surgery was long, complicated, tense. The waiting room was silent. Ridge refused to sit. Hope wept into her scarf. Donna clutched Katie's hand like it was her only lifeline. Bridget remained in the OR gallery, monitoring every heartbeat, every incision. Hours passed. Then the surgeon emerged. We removed the tumor successfully. She's stable. But the room froze. There's memory disruption. The part of the brain affected did involve short-term storage. We're hopeful it's temporary. But she may not remember the events leading up to the surgery, including all of you. When Brooke finally opened her eyes, Ridge was there. So was Hope. RJ. Everyone. She smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't light up. Her tone was cautious. Where am I? Hope stepped forward. You're okay, Mom. You had the surgery. You made it. Brooke blinked. Surgery. She looked at Ridge. Are you my doctor? Ridge's heart broke. Over the next few days, Brooke stabilized. Her speech returned. Her humor. Her warmth. But her memory, specifically, the ones from the final weeks, were gone. She didn't remember the fight between Ridge and Deacon. She didn't remember recording the voice journals. She didn't remember telling anyone goodbye. She didn't remember the fear. And so began a new chapter. A recovery that wasn't just physical, but emotional. The family debated what to tell her. Hope was torn till they let her listen to the voice journals. Should they pretend it never happened? Should they give her back the truth she'd once recorded? Meanwhile, Ridge struggled. He held her hand daily, told her stories, tried to rebuild what she couldn't recall. But every time she looked at him, searching for connection, his guilt deepened. Did she really love him? Or had he just imagined it because of her recorded voice? Deacon stayed away, shamed, silent, until one night he left a note in her hospital room. You once said you loved him. That was the truth. Even if you don't remember saying it, I heard it. And I'm walking away, because for once, I want to do what's right for you. Not for me. Brooke read the note. Confused. She asked Hope about it. Hope told her part of the truth. And when Brooke listened to her own voice that the recording meant for Rich cried. Not because it shocked her, but because, deep down, she believed it. Even if her brain had lost the words, her heart remembered the feeling. She called Ridge that night. Alone in the dark, her voice fragile but sure. If I said those things to you before the surgery, they must have been true. I want to know them again. I want to remember us. Ridge stepped into the room, took her hand. Then let's write new memories. Together. And in that quiet, post-surgical stillness, with the worst behind them but the truth still burning bright, Brooke Logan began again as the woman she used to be. But as the woman she chose to become. Voice or no voice. Memory or no memory. Love, always.